Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for the delay in starting, everybody. I'm really pleased to welcome to our British Theatre and Politics Research Group Dr Meg Mumford, who lectures in Theatre and Performance Studies at the University of New South Wales, Australia. Meg has published extensively on the theory and practice of Brecht, and is the author of the volume on Brecht in the Routledge Performance Practitioners series, which was published, I think, in 2009. But her areas of expertise include, as well as German theatre, you've also looked at dance theatre since the 19th century, and the politics of performing bodies, translation and intercultural exchange, and she's currently working with Ulrike Gard on a comparative analysis of recent reality theatre from Sydney and Berlin, which is a really... I heard you speak at the Acting with Facts conference in September, and this is a really fascinating project that brings together Australian and German
two very
performances.
Different performance cultures. Yeah.
So without more ado, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you,
Thank you very much for coming on this cold night.
And thank you very much for inviting me, and also to you all for coming. I know you're in that last gasp, so to speak. I know it well, so I'm doubly appreciative. For more ado, I'll just get stuck into it. The title of my paper today, my paper will be about 50 minutes once we've included this DVD, is Rimini Protokoll's Fascination with the Unfamiliar, Staging Real People as a Mode of Intercultural Encounter. Can I just quickly ask, who here is actually aware of the work of Rimini Protocol, familiar with it? Okay, great. It's like mainly with a little mix. Any German language folk in the room? A little bit, Sophie? Yeah, okay. All right. Now, since their establishment as a directorial cluster at the beginning of the millennium, the German-Swiss group Rimini Protokoll have garnered worldwide recognition for their theatre of everyday experts, a groundbreaking form of documentary theatre. This innovative mode belongs to the broader field of contemporary Western reality theatre, an area I'm currently investigating in a joint research project with Dr Ulrike Gard. By reality theatre, we mean performance that presents contemporary people and their lives on stage, either in person or in a scripted text, based on real-life interviews and documents. Invariably, the presentation is characterised by an emphasis on generating an experience of authenticity. That is, both a sense of fidelity to the facts of contemporary social reality and a sense of intimate contact with living people. And I'll be dealing more with that issue of intimate contact, though today we'll be talking about proximity. Rimini Protokoll's integration of everyday experts can be related to the marked interest of all three directors, Stefan Kegi, who is Swiss, Helga Taub and Daniel Wetzel, in engaging with people and phenomena from the contemporary world that do not often feature within the realm of professional theatre and or are insufficiently known within the public realm. To date, a significant portion of that interest has been devoted to theatre strangers, that's people who do not usually perform everyday activities in that context, and migratory subjects who have moved or continue to move their places of work and living within and across countries. Now, as a result of this interest in these two subjects, Rimini productions often generate intercultural encounters, particularly between people from different occupational and ethnic cultures, and between people who are themselves polycultural, combining components from multiple cultures in their everyday life. The designed work of these subjects in turn contributes to Rimini's own status as a privileged form of global nomad. In the Rimini productions that engage with migratory subjects, all the participants were involved in this negotiation of intercultural encounter. So I'm talking here about spectators, experts, theatre practitioners. Today I'm going to focus particularly on the experts and the theatre practitioners. I'm going to be looking at how they negotiate encountering culturally diverse people in two productions. The first is Mr. Dağacar and the Golden Tectonics of Trash. It's a mouthful for you, isn't it? Germans like these, you know. meaty titles. I shouldn't plunge down that germophobic line. Now that piece premiered very recently, 15 October, in Istanbul, and it was directed by Haugen Wetzel. It was devised for an end-on configuration. They work with different plane spaces. This was end-on. And the piece deals with, amongst other things, the economics of trash collection within Istanbul as experienced by 3 men from an Anatolian village and 1 man from southern Turkey who's of Greek gypsy heritage. All of these men moved to Istanbul for work and family reasons. So migratory subjects in that sense, and their migration to the city is a feature of the show. The second case study, Cargo Sophia X, the European truck journey, the Basel version of the screen throughout the entirety or much of today. Then this is a site-specific performance. Has anybody been involved in it? It came to Dublin, for example. No?
I've done it in Singapore.
Singapore, oh, fantastic. Oh, I will talk to you about that because I'm doing the European version. I'd love to know more about one of the Asian versions.
Yes.
Great. That's wonderful. Very exciting. It's a site-specific performance. It's directed by Katie, and it's about the economic and personal realities of goods transportation. And in this work, there are 2 Bulgarian truck drivers in the European version who tour about 45 spectators in an adapted lorry, as you can see here, through cargo handling sites within the host city. Now, my selection of the case studies is based to some extent on what I've been able to get proximity to, and I have obviously been able to get, I haven't been to one of the Cargo Sophia productions, but I have got lots of DVD material, but also it's been very extensively reviewed, part because it's appeared in so many cities in Europe and elsewhere. In the case of Dağacar, I've attended a rehearsal. It was a rehearsal that occurred 9 days before the premiere, so it was in the last phase. That rehearsal was in Berlin, and it then went on to premiere in Istanbul. It then came back to Germany, it came back to Essen, and I saw it in Essen. I saw the production in Essen only a week ago, actually, so it's hot off the press, what I'm talking about. So I've been writing all week. I've interviewed Helgard Haug about Mr. Dağacar. She very kindly did a wonderful Skype interview with me about that. And I've also spoken in an informal way to Sebastian Brunner, who's the dramaturg. In addition, I've chosen these 2 case studies because their productions offer very different types of expert theatre with regard to their staging strategies. And both of them deal with subjects who've experienced forms of social exclusion, which is helpful in illuminating how Rimini addresses the way encounters are informed by histories of determination and regimes of difference. For the analysis of the politics of encounter with unfamiliar others, I'm drawing very heavily on the work of feminist cultural studies academic Sarah Ahmed. She's that and much more, and her book, Strange Encounters, Embodied Others in Post-Coloniality, which did come out a decade ago, but still I find still very rich. I'm very influenced by her investigations of how contemporary Western subjects enter relations of proximity with strangers, particularly what she calls strangers, and by this proposition, it was going to flash up on the PowerPoint. Unethical communication is about a certain way of holding proximity and distance together. One gets close enough to others to be touched by that which cannot be simply got across. And I was very touched by that, and it's sitting there the whole way through my talk. I'll come back to it more towards the end. Her research has led me to ask the following questions. How do Rimini, and when I use the term Rimini, I mean their theatre-making teams. They work as a conglomerate with a large number of people, and they're very collaborative in work. How do Rimini enter relations of proximity with unfamiliar and culturally diverse subjects, particularly in the rehearsal period? Do these modes of proximity simply reassert the agency and self-worth of Rimini and their spectators? How do they negotiate difference and distance between culturally diverse people? And what sort of spectatorial encounters with these people do they facilitate? What strategies do they use to that end? Okay? That's the territory. Now, in his 2007 analysis of Rimini's approach to dramaturgy, Florian Malzacher includes a comment by Haug which clarifies the centrality of the group's interest in encounters with unfamiliar others. This comment appears in the 2008 translation. I don't know if anybody here has read Everyday Experts or dipped into it. Now, unfortunately, Ulrika and I found ourselves not in agreement with the translation of a particular passage that I'm going to use for you today. So actually what I'm giving is a modified version of what you will find in Everyday Experts. And I won't get into the nitty-gritty of the difficulty of translating the German word das Fremde here, which can mean the strange, the unfamiliar, and more. This is the comment from Haug in translation. The work really starts from detachment, from an interest in the unfamiliar, doing something with a conservative politician or a policeman. During the production comes a moment of complicity, which is very important. This complicity is possible because you can clearly tell people that the reason they are here is their Fremdheit, their strangeness, difference, unfamiliarity, mean all those things. They simultaneously search to legitimise themselves on stage, and it, the legitimation, lies within the fact that they can maintain this strangeness and not make everything right. From Haug's comment and her recent elaboration on it in an interview with my colleague, Ulrika, Haug explained that joy in discovery, which in German is Entdeckerfreude, and the desire to open up something as yet unknown to the directors is a key starting point for Rimini. It would appear that Rimini is interested in the unfamiliar rather than the strange. That is, in phenomena that have the potential to become better known or more familiar, and therefore are not fixed in place as something incomprehensible, reprehensible, or unassimilable. Haug's comment also clarifies her understanding that Rimini's approach to encounters is characterised by a focus on preserving the expert's difference, their difference both from actors and from Rimini, an emphasis I address at a later point. I'm going to use the unusual term, the unfamiliars, in this talk, and by that I mean unfamiliar people. The unfamiliars, rather than the strangers, the unfamiliars. Critics such as Katrin Bettina Müller have asked whether Rimini's invitation to explore an unfamiliar life simply provides compensation for lack of personal experience, especially for the educated elite. When Müller's perspective was raised by Ulrika, who also asked what Rimini hoped to achieve through giving themselves and their audiences access to the unfamiliar, Haug referred to two potential impacts of the work. Firstly, the experience of a fascination with getting to know something for oneself, and doing so through personally looking, rather than, say, via a medium such as the internet. And secondly, the achievement of new perspectives through the input of outsiders who have a certain distance from the people and situation being explored, which is something perhaps more familiar from Brechtian theatre. In an interview in September this year, not with ourselves, somebody else, Haug and Wetzel both present an encounter as central to their work. This form of encounter that they work with, which is driven by this joy in discovery, shares aims and methods in common with ethnography, particularly performance ethnography, and a socially engaged ethnography willing to encounter people excluded from the public realm. Now, in 2006, Hagi, when talking about his work at the time Hagia Sophia was really being first performed, he said that curiosity and wonder are the motor of my art, not engagement, i.e. political engagement, curiosity and wonder. But he then went on to express an interest in redressing the Middle European treatment of Eastern European truck drivers as acoustic and ecological burden, through initiating what he felt had been a neglected process of dialogue. Now, in Mr. Dağacar, the social engagement is evident in the presentation of trash collectors, three of whom are Kurds. These collectors, or as one of the collectors, the one who's actually from southern Turkey and who is of Greek Gypsy heritage, Byron says we're not trash collectors, we are recyclers. These collectors have been regarded by the state and municipal authorities in Turkey as visual pollution. The Kurds have experienced a long history of conflict with the Turkish state, which at different points in the last century instituted measures such as the burning of Kurdish language, the banning of Kurdish language, dress and folklore, and the enforcement of inscription and resettlement. And there was quite a bit of discussion about whether Kurdish would be used in this performance, because until about 4 years ago it was banned on the Turkish stage. We might talk about that a bit later. Across their body of work, Rimini opened up encounters with the unfamiliar authorities of their own nation, a CDU politician, police officers from Munich and so on, as well as with what Ahmed calls stranger strangers. Those others differentiated as unsingable. In the case studies that I'm dealing with, there are many experts, but I'm just going to be focusing in on these so-called stranger strangers. And that they happen to be the protagonists, is the main protagonists. Howard uses the term protagonist when talking about the experts during the rehearsal. She was not actors, but protagonists. When Howard used the phrase "Entdeckerfreude" during discovery, I couldn't help but think, of course, of colonial discovery, both scientific and ethnographic. And I wondered how Rimini's modes of proximity avoid the pitfalls of asserting ethnographers' authority and distance, and of further excluding marginalised unfamiliars. And when considering that question, I found it helpful to observe the way they approached text production and authorship, relations between observed and observed, social antagonism and cultural difference. And so they're the areas I'm going to quickly dip into. My experiences of Mr. Dağacar left me with the impression that Rimini's approach to ethnographic textual activities, like translating foreign languages and turning life stories into fixed text, or relatively fixed, was marked by a desire to acknowledge how these texts can dispossess the unfamiliar subjects they're connected with. In his 1986 article in Ethnographic Description, Victor Campanzo, drawing on Walter Benjamin, presents ethnographic translation as a provisional way of coming to terms with the foreignness of language. Sarah Ahmed points out that translation entails a reterming of the foreign, such that the foreign becomes the familiar, and produces a knowledge which creates the stranger in the familial in order then to destroy it. For her, such textual procedures demonstrate how knowledge creates and destroys the stranger. In their productions, Rimini incorporate many forms of text, including translations, statistical and factual information, autobiographical statements and stories. And what Rimini called in the Mr. Dağacar script meta text, with META written in capitals in their script, meta. Commentary on the making of the work, especially the relation between Rimini and the experts. Text in the form of, or many forms, all forms, is a central part of their stagings. One discussion of text during the rehearsal in Berlin that I witnessed particularly caused me to ponder the politics of ethnographic translation. It concerned a sentence that was to be delivered by the Kurdish protagonist, Abdullah, referred to by his colleagues and by Rimini as Arpur. The German translation of Arpur's Turkish line, which was projected on the subtitle screen in the rehearsal space, read as follows, and I'll give you my English translation. When someone comes and writes your life down, it's as if you have forgotten what you have lived. Now, at the rehearsal, there was huge discussion of this sentence. And I don't know how much of it I got or how much the directors got, because a lot of it was in Kurdish and then Turkish and then, of course, German and English. From what I could gather, he didn't feel the text was either exactly what he had said, and it wasn't what he wanted to say anymore. Helga liked something that he was getting at when he made that comment. Now, I noticed in a review of an Istanbul performance, this line had been singled out, but it had also been slightly changed from what I'd experienced in the rehearsal room. And the reviewer had connected it with a feeling of discomfort that had remained with her after the show. And the line in, what she saw went, when someone transforms your life into a script, it doesn't feel like yours anymore. Both versions of the line present biographical and autobiographical texts as, on the one hand, creative, can preserve a trace of the past, can refigure a life, and on the other hand, as a way of dispossessing and potentially misrepresenting the one who utters it, because that one has moved on as well. That Rimini decided to maintain a line of this sort suggests an interest not only in foregrounding Arpur's thoughtfulness, but also in acknowledging their ambivalence about the politics of turning lives into documents. Through their approach to the authorship of texts, they display a desire to disperse their authority as the knowing ethnographer and to make knowing a shared enterprise. However, through strategies such as the meta-text, they also acknowledge that this dispersal does not overcome the power relations that maintain the ethnographer's privilege. As is the case in much recent documentary theatre, Rimini presents scripts that combine different types of documents written by a variety of authors, as well as texts they have co-authored with the experts, sometimes in a manner very close to ghostwriting. These scripts have much in common with recent ethnographic writing, which, according to Sally Macbeth, seeks to legitimise the expertise of the members of the culture being investigated and to create informed intersubjectivity, predicated on listening and collaboration. Sarah Ahmed contends that when that type of ethnography presents the native informant as an equal co-author, it actually conceals the relations of force embedded in the desire to know more about the strangers. So such concealment in the context of a theatre production would include, and I'm extrapolating here, she talks about literature, so I'm pulling it into theatre, thinking of it in terms of theatre, would include a failure to signpost what aspects of the forms of text and staging produced by the theatre practitioners, though I think that failure to signpost can be very empowering, and I'll talk about that a bit later. Also a failure to divulge the social and material privilege that allows the theatre makers to have proximity to the experts in the first place. In Mr. Dağacar, however, some of the relations of force are foregrounded through this meta-text, through statements that outline the show's impact on the Kurds and their depot. And what I can work out about a depot is the depot is both a collective of workers and it is actually the building where they are housed. It's both. In this case, recycling workers. Both the destructive and creative nature of that impact of the theatre practitioners is acknowledged. For example, through the meta-text, we informed that for financial reasons, Rimini could only select a small number from the depot to come in the show and tour. That we learned that Rimini were worried what would it mean pulling individuals out of the collective. They also, we hear that when the Kurdish recyclers were absent from their workplaces, indeed the Kurds depot did fall apart, and most of the men, most of the men were reaccommodated in other collectives. They sold the truck, etc. We also learned that Bayram, who of Greek Gypsy heritage, Bayram has his own recycling business, and we learned that when he'd come back from intensive rehearsals, his workers were hanging around not doing much work, so he was having problems there. But, he says, I earned enough money through the theatre making to be able to support my wife, who wanted to take an English language course so she can move away from the cleaning industry to go into hotel reception work. Through the management of text, Rimini display their bid to replace centralised authority and what Daniel Wetzel has referred to as imperialist help with a democratic and mutually empowering social exchange. But simultaneously they acknowledge how that attempt is jeopardised through the privileged joy and discovery that first set it in motion. Another method that they use in their bid for egalitarian encounter is a play with the positions of observer and observed. Through this play, they questioningly highlight and replace the researcher, artist, and the spectator's positions as the ones who look and know. And we'll see a bit of this when we get into the video, which we will soon. In Cargo Sophia, Katie's arrangement of spatial relations enables him to establish a myriad of performance spaces and viewing relations. Inside the container section of the converted freight truck, there is rake seating for the spectators who face an expansive window. You can't see it here, it's on the other side. You'll see it in the PowerPoint, and you'll see it in the DVD. In the early stages, the audience experience a black box space. The window is covered by a screen, and the two drivers stand before the spectators, introducing themselves and the journey. Later, the screen gets lifted, and we get a two-way proscenium arch effect, where the audience look out through a framed window to the world that the truck travels past or wherever they stop, and also others look in at the spectators. The audience are in a darkened space when they're looking out, so there's a voyeuristic aspect, and some of them were aware of that heightening of the voyeurism. At the same time, you know, there are moments when audience are aware they are both watching and on show. Two happening. When the screen is rolled down, we often get documentary footage, which is about a fictional journey from Sofia to the city where the production is being hosted. And/or it's about the wheeling and dealing of Willy Beetz, who's the owner of the German company who owns Zolmat, the Bulgarian truck industry that these two Bulgarian truck drivers work for. And when that screen comes down, we've moved from the two-way proscenium arch into the cinema. There is also live footage of the drivers who are in the cabin. We get live footage of them as they're driving in the cabin and showing photos and telling stories of their lives. And this is when the cinema becomes the television. And all the while there is a digital peephole. There's a camera through which the drivers are able to look back at the spectators. Okay? And we won't see all of that in this clip, but see a few things and more. And lights.
Shall I turn the lights?
Can you do your lights, please?
Sure, yeah.
And sound. Sorry about the sound.
TV itself.
So, now we are in Sofia. After 1 hour, we can be at the border.
This is the black boxes. They're standing in front of the rate seating. Screens down.
People driving also, we can be in Switzerland after 36 hours, but we must respect the law, respect the working hours. That's why I think that 4 days will be enough.
Bitte anschneiden Hotel 30
I'm not going to translate for you, and I'll explain later why.
Den Handelsdirektor von Zolmat. Ich arbeite in dem Betrieb seit 1983. Zolmat hat eine alte Geschichte. Vor der Privatisierung war Zolmat der größte, der war der nationale Transporteur im Betrieb in Bulgarien, der einzige, der die ganze Export-Import gemacht hat. Bei uns zu Hause sind viele große Firmen wie Metro, Villa, Henkel, BASF, Osram, Bell, etc. Naja, durch den Krieg in Irak sind die Transporte gegangen durch die amerikanische und englische Armee. Leider ist die Situation nicht hier verbessert, deswegen wurde entschieden, dass man solange die Situation nicht normalisiert, werden wir keine Transporte nach Irak abwickeln.
So television, in the live.
I will start at 3rd year because the terminal is not loaded. Thank you, lady. Look.
You're joining Sofia.
Welcome to Sofia. There's a big laugh because they're in Switzerland.
Das ist bulgarische Parlament, ja?
Again, this is documentary footage. As they moving along the Basel, it's documentary footage of Sofia. The fictional we're on this journey with them.
here in the tomate, gurken, ich mag die sehr gute Schopfensalate. Ich gehe nach die Straße, der Name ist Boulevard, der Name ist Christoph Otter.
Im Container ist eigentlich alles, was Sie sich vorstellen können. Sie können hier Umzugshut, Diplomaten, Gepäck, Fischstäbchen, Salzsteine, Mountainbikes, Mikroskope, aber auch Chemikalien, Kunststoffe für irgendwelche Chemikalien, hochwertige Waren, Maschinen, aber auch Maschinen, die in der Schweiz abgebaut werden, in Containern nach Übersee gehen und dort werden die Fabriken wieder aufgebaut.
There we go. Great. Press there.
Good.
Yes, it's not far at all.
I'm so proud I've just made technology work.
Actually, no, I've just not been able to stop it. Oh no, gosh, no, fast. Yeah. Oh, it's strange. It's strange. Yes, that bit with her. I just want to show you a figure who intermittently.
Si so che risultano identificare.
Always outside the truck, a female figure.
Euro. So,
that's what I want.
That was right.
That's it.
That was 2000.
wir haben 650 Liter Dieselvertrag.
I've eaten more than.
When in doubt, just turn it off. Okay. But thank you very much also for bearing with my inability to forward that. I will come back to the woman singing Bulgarian songs. Reviewers' comments demonstrate that some spectators experienced during the show a sense of the following positions: voyeur, consumer, but also exotic other and cargo that are to be consumed. One of the effects, it seems, Katie's spatial work and viewing positions, his work with viewing positions achieves, is to create an association between, on the one hand, the spectator's desire to know unfamiliars and their goods and image consumption practices, and on the other hand, the exploitation of the labouring bodies of strangers seems to keep pulling those two aspects of the spectators' lives in association with the labouring bodies of strangers. Now, in Mr. Dağacar, the dominant subject's exclusive rights to the knowing observer position is challenged through a replacement of this position onto the experts. And I think this replacement occurs when the trash collectors are presented as capable observers of the directorial team's viewing activities. I'm going to come off text here a bit and try to explain what I experienced. In the rehearsal process, the meta text, which contains a lot about the director's attitudes towards the experts, this was spoken by Pina, who was a multilingual assistant who came from Istanbul to Berlin for the rehearsal. Now, Pina apparently didn't feel comfortable in this role on the stage. She does play a role later and comes onto the stage from the auditorium to assist with a game. But she didn't feel comfortable in this role. And Rimini pondered what they were going to do. They had actually wanted to be on the stage themselves and deliver that meta-text. But they knew logistically they couldn't do it. They have got so many productions going on, whizzing all over the place. They couldn't follow that production through its very rigorous touring schedule. So they couldn't be there to deliver that text themselves on the stage. And they then thought, how about we give that text to the recyclers, to the trash collectors? How about we give it to them? We'll modify it by going there, they, them. So the collectors are talking about us in that third person plural sense. They thought this and this about us. Yeah? Move it that way. Now, there's a distance and a difference being emphasised there, and it was also emphasised in the content, because the content refers to things like Rimini being very uncertain about whether they could bring these men to Berlin. Did they have passports? Did they have visas? Would they have abscond? Would they vanish when we got into Germany? And this is all there, in the meta-text, these uncertainties that Rimini had. When that meta-text was spoken by Pina in the rehearsal space, it seemed an act of self-reflection created by Rimini. Now, in the Essen production I saw, Pina's not there anymore, and I go, where's the meta-text? Where's Pina? I've lost my linchpin. Now, I obviously had a particular viewing experience because my body had gone. Yeah, she wasn't there. But I think I got confused. I thought the meta-text had been wiped. And I think I got confused. It hadn't been. And I felt it had been for another reason. And that was because the men really owned that text as if they had thought it, written it. So it was a displacement, a bodily displacement of that text. So it wasn't clear-cut because there was, in a way, a sense of whose text is this, and with Rimini there is a lot of that. There's a lot of, is this the experts? Is this a bit of ghost writing? Is this Rimini? What voices are speaking here? But at the very least, it appeared that these experts shared the observations of Rimini. They too were capable of observing in this manner, and that they had made these observations as well. Okay? Rimini's play with viewing positions in both of the performances I'm looking at, productions, demonstrates their awareness of and their desire to unlock concealment of social antagonism. They seem aware that, as Ahmed puts it, encounters are not simply meetings in the present, but meetings which reopen the prior histories of encounter that violate and fix others in regimes of difference. During rehearsal, when very tough aspects of the meta-text were being discussed, and they were discussed pretty vigorously by all parties, such as the sections dealing with the doubts and suspicions Rimini and friends of the experts had about one another. For example, a market seller had advised Aziz that he shouldn't go to Germany because they were the mafia and they would sell his kidneys in surgery. Okay? which got a big laugh in Germany, as you can imagine, embarrassed laugh, you know. Daniel Wetzel actually defended these sections. He expressed the belief it was important not to bow down to political correctness and instead to explore how great the distance initially was between the collectors and Rimini. In our recent interview, Haug also mentioned the importance of presenting material that revealed Rimini's moments of arrogance and of scepticism towards men. For her, and I thought this bit was quite interesting, I hadn't thought this one through, for her such a demonstration not only acknowledged social division, but the fact that Rimini were no better than those spectators who had similar arrogant thoughts. So in a way, they are making us as in me, because I was having those thoughts like, how the heck did they get these people to memorise this text, for example? Because they're not used to doing this. How did they do it? Amazing. I was having these thoughts. And so in some ways, Rimini allowed me to explore my ambivalence, my prejudice more, by putting theirs out there. Yeah? I think that's what she's talking about, trying to activate that in the theatre. It seems that she's saying this metatext strategy is a way of highlighting, and therefore is a step towards changing, shared and ongoing practices that fix unfamiliars as the excluded, the unassimilable. Now in Carlo Sofia, it's in many ways the simultaneous layering of contrasting journey experiences and of course the division of space and the division of labour that contribute to the foregrounding of social antagonism and to the revelation that the audience are complicit in exclusive practices. Now, during the journey the audience experience 3 journeys. They're on roughly a 2-hour ride. There is the fictional long-haul journey from Sofia to the host city where the production is being held. And then we hear about all the journeys that the drivers want to tell us about, that they have had. Now, the fictional and personal narratives tell us about, the interminable hours the men spend waiting for bugger all pay at border control queues. We hear about a very high degree of confinement, physical and social, of isolation and exclusion. They can't afford McDonald's, they can't go to hotels, so they basically sleep and eat in the cabin, and they have foods that are all stored in the cabin. In contrast, the spectators experience a relatively short and social pleasure ride. The driver's maintenance of service industry roles throughout the performance and their moments of sustained physical separation from the auditorium area. Of course, there are moments when we come together in a face-to-face encounter that has physical proximity, but there's also a lot of division in work, where there's a group in the cabin and then there's a group on the rate seating on the ride, so to speak. So what we're getting set up is this obvious economic difference between the middle-class cargo consumers and those who are servicing them. As in Mr. Dağacar, this approach to intercultural encounter is characterised both by a pursuit of democratic exchange and acknowledgement of the social antagonism that makes that same pursuit necessary and challenging. Now, in the last section of my talk, thank you for staying with me, I want to explore how Rimini's mode of proximity not only acknowledges the distances that are born of social antagonism, but it's characterised by, firstly, an interest in the contribution distance can make to an ethical encounter, and secondly, by a philosophical doubt that pure proximity is possible. In her discussion of ethnographic modes of proximity, Ahmed asks, if we can't overcome the relations of force and authorisation implicated in knowing itself, then is the answer to come to know how not to know? Such knowing would involve, I think, for example, teasing out what she says. 1, admitting the impossibility of being, or being with, the unfamiliars, of going native. 2, ascertaining and acknowledging what we can and can't know. And 3, recognising the unfamiliars as the knowing. In many ways I've already been discussing that point when we talk about the recyclers being knowing. In other words, it would involve recognising certain types of distance. Now, as I've mentioned, they certainly work with the third approach, and I think we see other strategies emerge, for example, in the way they work with linguistic competency. They're very open to working environments where people don't share languages, and you can't get verbal or textual exactitude. And as I think I've just briefly explained, I think you saw a little bit here of the mixing of languages occur. There are at least 3 languages in use in the production. And in the ones that don't occur in Bulgarian places, of course, the drivers are operating outside of their first language. And we have the same with Mr. Dağacar, where the Kurds are speaking in their second language, Turkish. They ultimately end up speaking Turkish on the stage. And in the rehearsal space, I think I've already explained to you, there's an extraordinary situation where we have Rimini speaking predominantly in English, which is their second language, with translators who are working with Kurds in Turkish. You with me? Now, it seemed, Haub said to me that what she valued out of this process of working in this way with linguistic competencies is you get a lot of time to reflect as a director, and boy did I see it, because you hang there while you wait for that translation. And you can see the directors ticking over, and they're also sitting back and letting things happen more. You can't pigeonhole and lock and push people along. You've got to wait for that translation. So it's not the same ping-pong, as she said, not the same ping-pong. But of course, she said it leads to a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of loss, both sides or all sides, happening as well. This situation of partial communication is experienced by the audience when we feel these people talking in second, third, fourth languages on the stage to us as well. Now, working with linguistic competency is hardly, or varying linguistic competency is hardly new in the performing arts. We get it all the time in physical theatres in particular, opera, etc. But I think in theatre that is text-based, in this case, text is central to what they're doing. It's relatively unusual because they also seem to be happy about inexactitude. Sometimes I'm in the auditorium and I'm going, that is a weird translation. That is weird. Or I hear the people talking and I hear, you probably heard here, are they actually saying what they mean? It's sometimes what I'm thinking. Yeah? Or have I fully understood what they're communicating? Like the acknowledgement of social difference and the distance it brings between people, this combination of linguistic difference reminds me of a point Ahmed makes when she's looking at the work of Emmanuel Levinas, his version of ethical encounter. According to Ahmed, and I quote, his ethics is about finding a better way of encountering the other, which allows the other to live as that which is beyond my grasp and as that which cannot be assimilated or digested into the ego or into the body of a community. In his work, the other refers to the weak, poor and marginal, and she questions his protection of the otherness of the other. She says, amongst other things, it fixes the other as an alien being that exists prior to encounter. She's got a very complex argument about that. I won't get into that. But she does welcome an acknowledgement of the sense of that which can't be grasped in the present. And I think that sense of not grasping quite the identity as well in front of you happened to me with the recyclers and when they're working with that metatext. And I'm going, who's speaking? Is this the guys? Yeah, this is the guys. No, it's Rimini. No, it's the guys, it's Irving Rimini. Possibly it's then modified by the, Rimini. I'm not quite sure. And Rimini does this again and again and again. We're uncertain about a lot of aspects of the identity of the performing figures in front of us. The sense of ungraspability is also created in their work from an insistence on showing the partial nature of their proximity. And by partial I mean both incomplete and biased, the two. In Cargo Sophia, one reviewer of a performance in Basel mentioned that the insertion of the moments of fiction, like when the Bulgarian woman was singing, drew his attention to the incomplete nature of his access to the drivers' lives. He referred to her appearances. There are a series of appearances. She intermittently appears outside the truck, singing in the middle of a roundabout with a microphone, for example, pedaling past on a bicycle full of packages. And she sings in Bulgarian and she sings Balkan songs. For the reviewer, these interludes, which spoke to him of desire and yearning, and men at times do talk about their yearning for family, yearning for their wives, etc., there's sort of tapping into some of that and more, also mirrored the world of the truckers. And it made him aware that one can only get a small insight into and not a full knowledge of what it's like to live in this foreign world. They also prompted his recognition that KP's mode of operation was to refuse closure, make offers, show excerpts, stimulate. In other words, that he's an artist of the partial. Now, Mr. Dağacar, overt moments of artifice reminded me that I was looking through Rimini's glasses at the collector's world, and that my access was constantly being mediated by them. And one vivid moment, and I'll add with this one as well, was during the rehearsal when the three Kurdish men were rehearsing a Kurdish dance led by Aziz. And they danced very closely together, actually their arms are up here, their hips are joined, and they move like a wall or a mass together. And the leader is waving his hand and motioning to signal changes in the dance. This was Aziz as well. And during the rehearsal there was a use of contemporary music technology, and there was particular use of a waving of plastic bags, or a rubbish collector's plastic bag. Now, the men were struggling to dance to this music, which Wetzel explained was a Kurdish piece of dance music, but he modified the bass. So to me it sounded like vaguely like techno. I must dig further into musical genres, but it sounded more like contemporary club music in some ways. And they found it very hard to move to it and said, can't we go and get one of our traditional pieces of music? And they went and got their mobile phone, as you do, and rustled up one of their pieces of music. But unfortunately the volume wasn't loud enough for them to be able to actually do the dance to it. And when I came back to the performance, neither of those pieces were used. As a different piece, which to me was very hybrid again, very, very clearly foreign dance music, but very clearly modified through digital technology in some way. So Daniel had obviously held fast on something here. And the plastic bag moved into a glove, a collector's glove. This way. And the glove reminded me, or set me imagining a piece of material or a scarf, something that had been accented and replaced. Yeah? And it was funny, at the end of the rehearsal, Aziz said to Wetzel, basically, please do not change our dance. You have changed so many of our things. And then he smiled and he said, I can make a show of this dance. Okay? I want to come back to that a bit later. Now, during the performance, he was actually given room to express his frustration at Rimini's approach to his culture's traditions. During the moment when he explains why the Kurds did not want Rimini to dismantle their abandoned depot and put it on the stage. He states that while his brother, who ran the depot, was okay with their depot being put on the stage, he and the other performers were against it because they felt, and I quote, "We don't want to be confused with this kind of work. We want to stand in front of you as just human beings with our traditions and our culture." Okay, and Halvor's expressed to me that she experienced an immense frustration in the men with the collective's emphasis, Rimini's emphasis on trash, the trash collection. They wanted to move further and further and further away from that issue. So there was a real struggle occurring. In the Essence performance, I've mentioned to you the work with the glove. The inauthenticity was very clear, or at least incomplete authenticity of the dance. And to my mind, it both dispossessed the experts. We know something's being replaced, clearly in the glove, for example, in the music. And it acknowledged that dispossession at the same time. It said very clearly, this is not authentic, this is not the authentic dance, folks. This is something else. However, the partiality of the dance, to my mind, was very constructive in another way. It contributed to the production's overall creation of something quite new. Portrayal of the trash collectors that challenged an abject image of downtrodden eyesores with a counter-image of a very energised, very creative collective. They earned a lot of applause for their creativity at the end of that dance and at the end of the finale. Even if this dance did not change the show, it certainly changed the familiar showing of trash collectors. One of the reviewers, Sarah Bukowski, pointed out that a hallmark of the production was the way it brought out the recyclers' artistry rather than having them wallow in rubbish. Throughout the show, the audience witnessed very skilled, very beautiful work. They witnessed people not only showing immense skill at sorting aluminium cans, PET bottles and so on, but also very acrobatic, leading in and out of these huge bins on metal carts, and also doing all sorts of cart ballets as well with them. The audience, I think, were also presented with, well, most of the audience, with what I and others found to be an unexpectedly clean and attractive landscape. And that forced me to consider my prejudice too, my thought of, well, why do I think there should be, really grotty? And Bayram insisted, this is what I wear. What I'm wearing in front of you now is what I wear when I do my work. Yeah, I'm not that eyesore. You think I am. And the rubbish is not soiled either. It is squeaky clean. And also, it has to be said that for a lot of people, they are good-looking group of people. Not just my sister and myself thought that. They're charismatic, and this was brought up also by the dramaturg who mentioned their charisma, mentioned Apo's skills as a folk singer, but also mentioned the selection process, the fact that they had met, some of the Rimini group had met these men in a chance encounter at night, and this Apo had been surprisingly welcoming and said, sure, come back and we'll have a chat about what you're interested in researching. And they hadn't met this, everybody else, and Apo explains this in the piece. He says, we were welcoming, all the other scavengers ran away because they were too busy working and they were too unused to people taking notice and taking me seriously. So there's something different. We know there's something, as in these people are picked for particular reasons, and really draws attention to the fact they've been cast for particular skills that they have. And now I'm plunging towards the conclusion. The focus on artistry reminds us too of the impossibility of pure proximity, given the performative nature of both stage and everyday life. Through features like the display of rehearsed script, they very overtly display, look, we've done this to death, there it is up on the screen, overt choreography, the open display of sound and lighting operators and so on. Rimini and their experts remind us we've been working on this for weeks because we are going in front of you, we're on mass display here. And we are performing ourselves. Everybody here is performing themselves. So are Rimini. Everybody is. Rimini do employ modes of proximity that don't involve such overt reminders of distance. They do involve improvisation. They do have documentary footage of trash collection factories and so on. They work very consciously with the frame. But for all that mode of proximity, they do work very consciously with the frame of theatre. And this frame, as one of the commentators on their work, Gerard Siegmund, puts it, affords a distancing. It turns the trusted into something foreign. And as both case studies testify, Rimini engages with the distance that comes from fiction and the distance that comes from acknowledging cultural difference. Okay, the conclusion. Both of the productions I've analysed suggest Rimini practices a mode of proximity that strives to achieve democratic, empowering social exchange. And to this end, they disperse the dominant subject's authority, they trouble the viewing consumption practices that fix marginalised unfamiliars. Their ethnographic and their artistic strategies include exposing the text's ambivalently creative and destructive potential, the insertion of a meta-text that exposes relations of force, a form of collective authorship that challenges centralised authority, preserves ungraspability, a spatial and textual play with observer-observed relations, the layering and juxtaposition of fictional and documentary narratives that reveal the audience's complicity in exclusive practices. Rimini's proximity also embraces forms of distance as useful for ethical encounter. These include the distances created through, they admit social antagonism and the impossibility of being or being with unfamiliars. They acknowledge the partiality of any insight into foreign worlds. Rimini creates such distances through opening up inexact linguistic communication. They almost revel in it. Not totally. There's an ambivalence there, I suppose, but there's a great deal of celebration. Withdrawing signposts of authorship, inserting overt fictions and artifice, creating hybrid expressive forms, acknowledging casting and choreographic procedures. In her discussion of ethical communication, and closing with her comment, Ahmed calls for a getting closer that yet takes up the impossibility of that very gesture at one and the same time. To my mind, Rimini's attempt to get closer, with its respect for distance, moves some ways towards answering her call. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we didn't get to see the very creative and engaging your protagonists in Mr. Dağacar. But another time. Would you mind if I put on my 1980s tape recorder as a form of memory to try and remember what you were saying? I'll also try and write it down.
Not at all, no.
Is that okay?
It's behind you, it's on the chair.
Yes, it is. I'll just go back so.
Meg, thank you so much for that incredibly stimulating, in-depth, rigorous paper. I thought that was really, really fascinating, and particularly set alight by the research that you've recently undertaken. I mean, it just had that pace and energy of recent research, and that's why it's fabulous to have you here. Thank you very much indeed.
Exciting.
I just want to give there is some time for questions or observations, so I know some people are working very closely in this area. Does anybody have any observations or questions for Meg?
I have thank
Great.
you very much for that. It was really fascinating. Interestingly, the show of theirs that I saw was Capital. When it was in the Kunsten Festival in Brussels, and it was performed in German, and they helpfully provided simultaneous translation into French, or I'm going to get the wrong one, Flemish or Walloon or Flemish, whichever one it was. And I was with some friends, and we were all taking a punt on which one we probably understand most of. So we were going, I'm going to go with the French, I'm going to stick with the German.
Yes.
And I think that, a lot of what you were saying was really amusing me, because it was bringing back that experience of kind of having to take your pick as to what encounter you're going to have, which I think as an English-speaking audience member is not that usual.
It's not from Australian practices either.
It's
quite a distinctive documentary practice.
Absolutely. But I was very intrigued by something that you said very early on, actually. I think it was a citation or your retranslation of the Everyday Expert piece, the book, when you talked about the way that they're willing to maintain strangeness and not make it, quote, right. And I just thought that's such an interesting way of thinking about performance, that performance always tries to put itself right. And I'd love to hear you just sort of expand on that as one of their strategies, but also as a way that we disrupt all of our theatrical spectatorship when we see this kind of work, and the will to always make it coherent, make it right.
Yes,
I thought that's very interesting.
not right. A number of ways of coming at that. I think Force Entertainment and Co have been very influential in Germany, but also other forms of post-traumatic theatre, if you like, on that, and DB8, etc., where they question this notion of cohesion, the totalitarian nature of cohesion, coherence, etc. And I suppose Hans Leibniz's work that Rimini is very afraid with from their studies at Gießen. They come out of university training, Gießen, and where Hans Leibniz's work is very prominent, or one of the things that are prominent. So I think there's that in it. So there is a challenge to dramatic theatre and the philosophical paradigms that come with it, and that there are notions of partial understandings of the world, not sealed perfect cosmoses that cohere. Is the model. Brecht's there as well.
Absolutely.
Yes. So that's happening. I think also they're very interested in visual arts, and indeed Katie comes out of training in the visual arts, and interested in histories of this notion of placing objects, in the case of visual art, into art galleries and so on. They're interested in challenging their expectations of what should be framed, but also they're interested in framing the framing work that we already do in our life. I'm doing it right now with you, you're doing it back. We both know it, we know how well we have constructed our gender behaviour with our heads on the side, etc., etc. Yes. And that fascinates. Yes. Sorry. Exactly. So a couple of trajectories I think are feeding into that notion of not rightness. Thank you. Not very right.
When you were speaking about the activities of picking garbage and separating the garbage from one another, I was just wondering, how do they stage it? Do they aestheticize it? Do they make it? You said it looked ballet-like, but was it supposed to look ballet-like, or was it just kind of by happening by them doing it on stage?
I suppose it reminds me a bit of sort of Judson dance, and that sort of in the sense of it works with pedestrian movement. They work with pedestrian movements, or what we would call, everyday movements, as we go about our work and business. So they're trying to over my materials and so on would appear on that stage, but then we start to organise my pedestrian movements, and they very clearly show that they are managing and choreographing that pedestrian movement. I'm so sorry I can't show you images of the staging. The staging in Dağacar, you saw obviously what's happening with Hagia Sophia, and I think there's something similar in that they, and this is Brecht, I think in some ways they clearly show construction and structure. And in Dağacar they have also a pedagogue puppeteer who sets up his puppet theatre, and he sets it up with rods, metal rods. And he normally, Hal was telling me, he normally would put a red curtain right around it, but they leave it bare, so we just have the frame. And we see him often perform side on, and we can see him operating. We can't see the screen, and then the screen's turned around, and we see the shadow effect of the shadow puppet play. So this clear revealing, exposing of how we construct and make our worlds is there, and it's, the four recyclers have their metal carts with plastic bins in them, and we're clearly showing not only how they practice, rehearse, and get their work right, but also we're showing theatre work, because the cardboard is so new and it's so wonderfully organised. Where they're going to get the cardboard to put it in the bin for the moment they're going to jump into the bin, whatever. So we're showing theatre as work as well, and the beauty of both types of work. Quite interested in this is Brecht in line with New Capital too, of putting work on stage. Absolutely.
I've really enjoyed your talk. I'm not working on the Rimini Protokoll, but I saw a piece in Brighton where you had 200 games consoles.
Right, was it last year or another group?
No, Rimini.
Rimini, yes, that's right.
It's the very last year. Yeah. And it's so interesting to hear these kind of confusions of audience experience, because it's exactly my impressions. Yes. And just kind of unsettled as to what I was seeing and why. Yes. And but one of the things that I don't know whether it's quite the same in these two pieces, but certainly with this one was a kind of disruption of the desire to consume in the audience, because it was thrown back at us by all the actions we'd taken were shown in a kind of example form on the screen. It's too complex to explain, but in terms of decisions that they collected, they had memorised, and they could show exactly for any single person what their decisions have been through the whole game. And these became little icons beneath your B.
Yes.
But they then said, well, that can be used for advertisers to completely target you, so that advertisements no longer will be kind of just generic and sent out, but absolutely peaked off, depending on exactly these kind of choices that we were just happy making in the game. And it just really threw it back upon you.
Yes.
And I thought that was so interesting that we'd been investigated.
Yes.
We hadn't realised we'd been investigated, but we'd all been investigated. And they had all that material on all of us. But it was this kind of very interesting relationship that they set up in just the way that you have unpicked there, I think.
And in Dağacar, they're helping us to investigate ourselves through it. They're investigating themselves. That's happening there. But they're also, I think that I think Florian Mars like this well when he talks about dramaturgies of care and insecurity. And the insecurity, as far as me as spectator goes, both the rehearsal and the performance, really gets me working. Gosh, insecurity does. It has me swithering and dithering and aware of all my histories of prejudice and my desire to be somewhere else. And it really agitates and brings memories and thoughts, and I have to work. Quite hard.
It's really fascinated by the point you were making to do with the bodily displacement of text in particular, and it started to get me thinking about the territory upon which performances take place, both in theatre spaces and non-spaces. And it was really interesting the fact that I saw a production of called Castle in a Box in Oldenburg in Germany. And it's really fascinating because the performance is happening inside a space, which is technically the space that belongs to the call centre worker, but it also doesn't belong to them. And similarly with these globalised cargo spaces in cargo sphere, it belongs to the truck drivers, but it also doesn't belong to anybody. So in terms of the ownership of the text and the ownership of the spaces, so I was just curious about, in terms of Dağacar and the choices they make, was it ever clear why they decided to... That was a theatre piece, wasn't happening in a theatre space?
Theatre configuration, yes.
So I've always been curious about how they arrive at the choice of where they stage a particular piece. Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't, and it's a very good question. It is a very good question. And I kept thinking that through too, in some ways, that it made it... I suppose what I thought about is it made it very, very hard for people who are not used to memorising and standing front on to a massive group of people. They really put a challenge there. And I wanted to, because I was aware that in Istanbul there had been another performance, if you like, where I think Byron was involved. The trash collectors had taken the audience on a tour, a walking tour, of their environment, which is a very different type of performance. And it did get me wondering, it felt, why you guys are pushing this division hard. You are here. I didn't know if they had consciously brought that through, that they were going to do that. Kind of confrontational in a way, with both of themselves and with not only, I've talked a lot about the Kurds and Bayram, but also there's Hasan, who's Turkish, who also had an interesting position as a trained actor and as a puppeteer in his relationship to Rimini. There's something interesting happening there as well. They definitely wanted to use him and the theatre space he brought with him, the puppet space as well. I don't know if that had come into the choices first too, because they wanted to play, I think, with concealment. I think it threw a bit more. The puppeteer is very concealed as a performer, and it's concealing the performer, and also doing this concealed economic activity that occurs where there's a lot of unauthorised recycling or trash collection occurring as well. So, good, great question, and I'm just a few ideas as to why, but I don't know.
Was the audience visible? I mean, was the audience in a darkened space or a light space in that piece?
We were in darkened near some performance, though it wasn't by any means cinema pitch black. I was very aware, even the moment I entered that particular space in Essen, that we were with the directorial team and the lighting and sound designers who were operating, as often occurs in temporary performance spaces, in space of the spectators. But yes, we were pretty much darkened. And there was an issue I haven't taken up is because I get so obsessed with bodies. I always end up with bodies and text somehow. I'll leave it to others to do in a fascinating way. They work with space and rhythm and sound. Well, we end up doing with rhythm. But they do actually, Helga made comment to Ulrika that she's wanting more and more to work with these, we could call them, well, they're non-linguistic elements. And there's a lot of use of spotlighting, a heck of a lot, where men actually use torches as well. There's a moment early on where they all put torch light over speakers that rumble out earthquake noises. This part of the show also deals with the very precarious geological situation that Istanbul is, with a lot of movement of the earth happening as well, with a very serious earthquake forecast. And the men, all of them, including Hassan, hold their torches over the speakers early on. There's this notion of lighting the concealed peeps coming up, so, and they illuminate the puppeteer when he goes side on, and they use heavy spotlights as for some of the nightmare. There are 2 nightmare sequences, so they would explain some moving nightmares that they have had, apparently.
I've got a lot of thoughts actually, because I hadn't really thought about this until since I actually saw this piece and since I saw the cargo I guess it must have been in the very end of May, early June.
Yes.
So I haven't actually written it through yet, but a lot of these things about space and lighting and concealed, because when I saw it, we started off in the daylight and went into darkness. So that relationship between viewer and the observer and the observed was very much more one-directional, because you kind of got the sense that people would kind of look up, but then they'd look away. So like they could see, but they couldn't actually see us at all. So it was much more...
Who could not see you?
The people who were outside, because we went... it's simple, what they did was...
So you felt that where you could see out, it was not easy for people to see the bodies within.
Yes.
They could see that there was a strange
window. There was a screen, but they couldn't see beyond that.
I wondered about that, and I'm so glad I wanted to ask Katie, was it a two-way, or could you only look out and not look in? Because when you look at some of the pictures, it looks like you can actually see the furniture, the rake from outside, but your experience was no.
Well, I think it depended on the outside ambient light.
And how much light.
And how much light you could see, and I think it was very, very changeable and shifting. But in relation to Singapore, what they did is, Singapore's a very small place, right? So everybody in Singapore thinks that they know everything about Singapore. And so it was really marketed as a kind of voyage of exploration. That's the only way I can describe it like. You will go places you've never seen before, to ordinary Singaporeans, right? And I was like, this brings me to the kind of next point, which is that the nature of this distancing and encounter, it's not just confusion, but it's this idea of exploration, and the idea of the kitsch, I think, is very important for this piece, because it was like, oh, this is exciting and it's novel, and oh, the truck is novel, and oh, it's all kind of, and the woman singing was like, oh, that's really hilarious, because Singaporeans love anything that's kind of kitsch and a bit, a bit kind of karaoke mode, very much so, and they kind of really responded well to that. But at the same time, they also got fatigued by it. So by the time it kind of came around the third or fourth time, everyone was like, oh, whatever, And I think that, so there's a nature of that kind of distancing and it's very, very shifting within that, and the modes of distance also shift dramatically as they get repeated. And I think this sense that, as a response to that, I think it's very easy, to kind of be a bit of devil's advocate. It's easy to overplay the extent to which this piece allows you to investigate the nature of your consumption practices, or in the kind of context of Singapore, the kind of reliance on migrant workers. I think it's very much like, oh look, I never knew they lived in these dormitories. Oh look, it's very accepted, in that kind of Asian context, it's very accepted that that's just the way things are.
Yes.
Migrant workers in Singapore have no rights. You know, like they don't have an all collective organisational body or anything like that. So it's just like, yeah.
I think for the purposes of economy of time.
It's just a bit like, I think some of these points can be a bit overplayed.
Well, also I've heard the piece. I haven't come across yet reviews in a language I can read. That it didn't work so well in Asia. Now that could mean so many things, and maybe you're tapping into one of the things as well that's happening now, which is about consumption practices as well. How we consume. Maybe tapping into something you mentioned about consumption in terms of fatigue, but not to worry. Fatigue.
Sorry, I didn't laugh or roll. I was just like, oh, all these ideas.
No, that's great.
I think there needs to be a serious exploration of really consumption, somewhere there, and the old problem of are they reiterating it, sufficiently challenging it, and all those sorts of things. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We've made a 15-minute late start by having 20 minutes over our time, but that's absolutely fine. Thank you so much. Can I just finally, where's the work heading? Is it publication or?
I would like to publish this particular work, which yes, it's very focused in there on context and bodies and all exactly. But also it is a large project together with Ulrika, where, as you mentioned, we're looking at Australian facilities groups that we haven't really know about academy as well. Perhaps Steve Hutton, who a bit like Jeremy Weller, if you've heard of Jeremy Weller, the Grass Market Project, operating or still are operating in Berlin. And that's time for a little lunch. So if one is interested in verbatim theatre documentary performance, something I mentioned at the conference where I met Chris, just to let you know, a publication has come out edited by Paul Brown, who himself has written about plays in Australia. And Paul and I and quite a group of people work very collaboratively, and almost like we were writing a verbatim play ourselves on verbatim theatre for very specifically secondary school students in the state of New South Wales, for whom verbatim theatre is now a topic on their school reading menu, so to speak. And I think while work is very targeted at that audience, it's also interested in reaching practitioners, and it has practitioners' voices here, a lot of practitioners who are interviewed and so on. So a bit like the Barton and Barton, that book that's come out. It also has, if you go into teaching or are teaching, it has quite a lot of exercises from, for example, lead players in version 1.0, who I think are the most exciting documentary theatre groupings in. So, quite a little interesting one there. Paul Brown, the Barton Staging Area Community, and a wonderful sort of collective activities and writing of that text.
Thank you very much. Thank you.